Welcome to the Pillars of Wisdom podcast. I'm your host, Gillo. Joining me again today is my co-host, Vito. And today we're going to be talking about expatriation and the main obstacle to expatriation, the main obstacle to successful expatriation, which is obsessional neurosis. Lead the way.
Right. So when we're talking about obsessional neurosis, most people, they kind of say that they want to change, right? And it's the whole reason why they go to therapy. But the truth is that they don't actually want to change. It's just that their current structures, their current symptoms aren't comfortable enough for them, and they're trying to get back that comfort. And a lot of times it manifests in these different ways, but it's going to be specifically about expatriations and how that manifests. How some people, they just kind of don't take it all the way. And we're trying to just uncover the psychological structure that most of us actually suffer from.
If you want to live a better life and you're leaving a country behind that's not working, a lot of people will bring those beliefs with them, those beliefs that don't work. And when it's time to make a change, you have to make a change yourself. And you can't just be in a giant fantasy of endless vacation. So tell me about fantasy. Tell me about endless vacation.
Right. So fantasy. Well, the thing about fantasy is it's not so much that fantasy is a bad thing, right? We're not talking about you having like a dream or something like that. When we're talking about fantasy, we're talking mostly about these internal systems that a person has that they're struggling to sort of like traverse, right? And so what happens is, instead of taking action, there's this inertia because their internal systems are so dialed up that when any real moment happens to them, they just stop, right? And that fantasy just kind of exists to give them sort of like a soothing feeling of like, well, it's actually not so bad, and I really like my struggle here, right? You've dealt with people who, when you wrote your articles about expatriation, they called you a coward for leaving, right? And that's one way fantasy can manifest, because realistically, they're not really patriots, right? They're just saying that as an excuse to not move out themselves.
I think there's a lot of fantasy. I think as we all know, nationalism is a fantasy. Most governments are run by banks. So people are caught in the patriotism fantasy. People are caught in a lot of different fantasies. And I think the economy is changing very quickly. And as the economy changes, you have to change with that economy. And fantasy can be a good thing because it can be a rehearsal for your future life. You rehearse things mentally and then you go do them. But if you just stuck in the rehearsal phase, nothing's going to change. And when you move to a new country, you need to adapt quickly. I know a lot of people are going to be moving because of taxes, because of inflation, because of schools that are more in line with people's values, so their kids grow up to share their values. But to achieve those things, you have to go and get them.
Right. And the thing is the reason they don't is because it doesn't hurt enough for them to really get them, right? So the neurotic really only moves when the pain is bigger, right? When the pain is almost unbearable, right? But the danger is exactly that, is that your situation in your country doesn't necessarily get worse in this dystopian way of, well, now they're putting you all in prisons, and now it's just you have a big brother who just watches over you, right? With like a massive eye of Sauron somewhere in the distance. It's actually a very slow death that you don't notice, and it's it's bad, but it's not uncomfortable, or it's only uncomfortable enough for you to barely handle it, right? And a lot of these systems, they kind of take that as an advantage, right? Because again, most neurotics, they only move when it's an extreme
I
situation.
think governments understand that the predominant psychological structure is the neurosis structure. And so when we go back and we think about the pandemic, what all of us experienced and hopefully didn't forget yet, they slowly tightened the noose. And it's always uncomfortable, but not so uncomfortable that you leave. But then it gets more uncomfortable, right? It's the frog being boiled slowly metaphor, right? And I think the correct thing to do is to map out that trajectory and preemptively move, preemptively rip the band-aid off, preemptively jump into the cold water all at once. Um, and you know, it's if you're changing, right, it's cheaper to do everything all at once, right? You're gonna unstructure your life, you're gonna move, and then you're gonna restructure your life, right? I think that's the cheapest, easiest way to go about this. I think, yeah.
Yeah, right. Do you have any examples on how that slow boiling happens? Because I feel like most people don't know.
I think I think realistically, since we have an international audience, I think it's about the pandemic, right? Like, um, we can talk about higher tax rates slowly. We can talk about slowly more and more restrictions. I think we also saw, trying to think, travel restrictions were really bad. And then also, if I'm sure there's a lot of parents listening, the slow ratcheting down, the slow dumbing down of the school system. So it's a ratcheting effect where things only click in one direction and they don't move back. And governments are really, really smart. They know that people don't want to rip the band-aid off. So they're going to take advantage of that structure. And so a lot of what we're doing is about outrunning that and going into a place that, isn't really mapped well. It's a place where you're going to make a big movement that the system doesn't expect you to make, and that's where you're going to succeed because you're going to break through.
And that's how they kind of take advantage of people's fantasies too, right? It's because they know that most people are not going to do anything about it, right? They're not going to rip the band-aid off. And so they kind of expect people to stay in their fantasies, to have their internal system so dialed up that they're not going to move.
I think the next thing is, look, we all have fantasies. We all have national fantasies. There's an expat fantasy, and everyone's going to have a fantasy that they're going to define themselves with. But you need to define yourself in a way that benefits you. So you can be, let's say, a legacy country patriot who's being ratcheted, and complaining about the system is also a fantasy, right? Today you and I dressed up in very nationalist Mexican attire, and this is a fantasy, and it's a fun fantasy. It's a fantasy that a lot of people enjoy, but in terms of tax freedom, in terms of lifestyle freedom, I don't think you're allowed to smoke on the beach in the United States. I think this is a fantasy that you can transition into, that will serve you, that will be good for you. So I guess instead of letting the fantasies control you, you need to choose which narrative, which ego identity structure is going to long term be good for you. It's going to be good for your family. It's going to be good for your bank account, and your long term quality of life. So I'm not saying, to be a hardcore super soldier who just moves at the objectives and feels nothing, like a Terminator. I don't expect that from most people. I think it's you transition into something that will last, that will work.
Right, right. And again, this is the thing that most people don't do, right? Because in their fantasies, nothing ever goes wrong, right? In their fantasies, they're always in the right position. In their fantasies, they're always the hero of the story, no
I
matter what the
I
situation
think
is.
in psychoanalysis there's something called the split, and the split is an external event. Um, can be called the event, and it's something that takes place that you don't account for, that you don't think, and that undermines your worldview. You know, you could talk about the dot-com crash for all of our 40-year-olds, the 2008 financial crash, and if you think back to those moments in American history, you know, there were a lot of cool suburban dads, you know, my friends' dads actually, that they got rug pulled on that fantasy, and it was really, really bad for them.
Right.
Uh,
And they needed to change.
they needed to change. And one of my clients, his father was a VCR salesperson. And instead of becoming a DVD salesperson, he jumped in front of a train in the Netherlands, actually in front of his family. So I mean, there's literal train jumping, which is, you know, um, but there's also waiting to be rug pulled by your bank, being rug pulled by the government. There's a jumping in front of a slow train, which is just as bad as a real train.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so I guess, you know, one of the things that we learned, you know, we've been talking to people a lot on the internet for a long, long time, and we learned a lot from people's successes and failures. You know, I think you and me have talked to thousands of men, and no one is really that unique. No one is really that special. And what I want from the people listening this is, I don't want you to jump in front of a train because you can't sell VCRs anymore.
Right. I mean, we're not saying that people are lazy in any way. We're just saying that their internal regulation systems are stopping them from saving themselves from that slow train, right? So it's not really that we're saying that, oh, to the people who don't want to leave, they're not they're they're these like lazy people who are like fine, or they're these fake patriots, right? What we were saying is that all these things that you tell yourself are those excuses to not see that train coming at you.
I, I'd also want to point out to like the real patriots, you know, if you're an American, your ancestors moved to the US, they dropped a European fantasy and they embraced an American identity, right? And I know there's some Southerners, after the Civil War, a lot of Southerners actually moved to Mexico, and they embraced a Mexican nationality. There's a lot of Irishmen who became Mexican because they felt the draw of the Catholic faith.
Yeah.
They were sent to fight the Mexican government, I think in the 1800s.
Yeah, and then they betrayed the Americans.
Americans, or you could say they reunited with their Catholic brothers.
Yeah.
Um, so people switch fantasies all the time. I think your ancestors did too. This isn't anything new. This is an ongoing process.
Yeah.
And we're just in the current wave of it in social media. Um, and it's going to be kind of your turn to get on the lifeboat early before everybody else realizes that they need a lifeboat.
That's true. Now,
Um,
Lacan talks about dependency on the other,
okay.
right? And he says, and I feel like that's also really connects to this like national identity and all that stuff, because it doesn't just affect on how neurotics like relate to people around them, but it also determines their entire structure, entire desires, right?
So okay, so tell my audience, maybe this is the first video. It's a great video. I'm pretty sure it's gonna be a lot of people's first video. What is the other?
So the other in this case, in Lacanian terms, is really just think of it as these authority systems in your life, right? So think of religion, your parents, your teachers, the law, the school, right? Society as a whole, right? Is this voice in your head that tells you what's right and what's wrong and what you're supposed to feel and what you're not supposed to feel, right? And what a lot of people don't realize, or what a lot of people kind of like repress, is how much the other, like those external things, affect us, right? And not just in terms of like our actions, but also our desires, our identity, right? Um, you know, you probably, everybody as a kid had their parents tell them, "Oh, I want you to be a good student. Oh, I want you to get good grades. You need to do this." And you, as a kid, you ask yourself, "Well, what the fuck does that even mean? You know, like what does it mean to be a good kid? I have no idea." And nobody really tells you, so you kind of just have to figure it out on your own. While there's this external pressure that tells you how you should be, right? And you start internalizing it, and it becomes this inner authority voice that tells you sort of like what's right, what's wrong, what you're supposed to desire, what you're not supposed to desire.
So, so what I want to point out is there's that internal authority voice, and I'm not suggesting anyone lives without morality like a wild man from Lord of the Rings. I'm saying that a lot of these systems, the systems that you were brought in, are old, and that doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means that they're economically outdated. And so you could be groomed for a career that doesn't pay. You could be groomed for an identity that doesn't pay, right? I remember when Bitcoin came out, they're like, cyber money, and Bitcoin was the biggest opportunity for the middle class, probably ever, ever, ever. Um, so I'm saying that you can still be yourself, but there's a lot of behaviors that aren't going to be rewarded. I think with AI, a lot of secretaries are going to go out the window. Back in my law school, there were a lot of people who did a lot of legal citation. That's just going to go all to ChatGPT. So there's a lot of modes of being that you might be told psychologically are good for you, but you're not going to benefit from. They're not going to be rewarded, and you're going to be pushing a boulder uphill with no prize. So I think it's important to engage in the kind of behaviors in terms of tax optimization, lifestyle optimization, cost of living optimization, lifestyle optimization that are really going to actually benefit you, and not the 1980s, 1990s system of morality that made sense and worked well back then, but doesn't work well, 25, 35 years later. So continue to be a good person. Just help yourself.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that you're not telling people to be immoral. And here's what I want to add to this. Because even if you do the complete opposite of what uh, of what your parents wanted you to do, for example, right? Um, or even the complete opposite of that internal voice, you're still functioning off of that big other, right? Because you're assuming your identity to be the opposite of that. So even if it's just like the complete opposite, you're still putting your identity onto that authority figure, right? And you're still determining it from that authority figure, and that makes you dependent on that psychological authority that, like you said earlier, you need. It doesn't really like help you to psychologically adapt to new situations.
I think one of my, there's what your parents want from you. And I had a friend, and he told me the best way to analyze your parents' advice is just when you hear something from your parents that you kind of question, imagine it came from one of their friends, like someone of the same demographic, same age, same socioeconomic, and think about it in that sense, because obviously we all have a very strong attachment to our parents, but just because we love our mommy doesn't mean our mommy is pushing us in the correct direction for this upcoming economic reality, I would say.
Right. And so in this case, it's not so much that the structure changes, but it's just the content that changes, right? And that's kind of like this kind of like leads to these fascinating cope mechanisms that neurotics have on how they handle their anxieties.
So tell me about some of these cope mechanisms that don't move people forward.
Right. So one of them would be repression,
Okay.
right?
What is repression?
So repression really is, think of it as a uh, forgetting on purpose, like a purposeful forgetting, right? So let's say you experience something traumatic in your life, and in order to deal with it, you kind of just put it into your unconscious, right? So that you don't have to think about it. You know, if you've been like touched by your uncle, right? That is something that is very traumatic, and you don't want to relive that memory over and over again. So your brain kind of protects itself and puts that into this pre-language thing,
Okay.
right? But the problem is, and in this case it makes sense because it's an extreme thing. But let's say it happens when you, for example, you lose your job, right? Or you're in a shitty marriage, or you're or your children are complete like fucks, right? Or you're alienated from your social life. Now that repression works against you because instead of acknowledging those problems that are in your life, you just purposefully forget about them.
I think, if your uncle touches you and you repress it, that's a emotional regulation strategy, right? Okay, he touched you. Hopefully he's in jail now, right? But when the government touches you, it doesn't stop touching you. And so I guess what I'm saying is I think all of us were touched during the pandemic, some worse than others. And I think we need to get away from that uncle that is.
Right. It's exactly that. Like, you're being touched by your uncle and he's still in the house and you're around him, and you're like, well, hopefully my uncle doesn't touch me again. And even though you're like literally next to him and nobody's in the room with him to stop him from touching you.
And so he keeps touching you, right? So what I'm saying is from 2019 to 2021, these legacy brand countries decided to start touching everyone. And they invaded a lot of rights and freedoms. And so, I'm not saying to be a bad person. I'm saying get away from your uncle. And that's why we're Mexicans now, because it's harder for that uncle to touch us here. If you want to live your best life, you have to live your best body. And that starts with an amazing workout early in the morning. The best workout of your life can't and won't happen surrounded by the worst people in the worst environment. To be the best, you have to surround yourself with success. The most important part of building muscle is recovery. And that can't happen if you're bogged down by distractions. Beautiful places don't just feel different, they inhabit a different energy. Energy that's essential for you to live life to the fullest. Growth requires abundance. Your physical, spiritual, and mental well-being is ultimately a product of your environment. Logistics are the hidden variable of life. If it's expensive, chaotic, and stressful just to live, it's impossible to build in abundance. The Pillars of Wisdom is your roadmap to living your best life. And all of that starts only when you take the first step.
Buy your copy today so you can be in the beach with me.
It's funny and it's not funny. And humor is also another form of repression.
That's true. Yeah.
So I'm not saying to stop fully repressing. I'm saying let's acknowledge the dangers and risks that are emerging right now in this new era, and get away from them instead of coping.
Right. But the thing is people find comfort in that coping. Right. And so even when you tell them that they need to stop coping, they're going to continue coping because, again, it, like you said earlier, it emotionally regulates them. And then what we have is, like, we'll loop it back into, instead of the structure actually changing, it's just the content of it, right? And that's why people who move to fucking, let's say, like the people that do move, right? When they move to like these soft spots. Like, instead of going all the way down to Mexico, a lot of people, they just move to Texas, right? And sure, Texas is maybe different from California or Portland, but it's still in the same U.S. government, right? It's still the same tax bracket. It's still the same structures, and nothing really changed.
I think
And instead of acknowledging that, they use that to say, well, I did a change. Well, you didn't do a change that's structurally different. You just did a change that's different in terms of content.
I would say it's easier and it's better for you to make a structurally significant change than to repeatedly get touched by your globalist uncle, you know.
Right.
So I guess that. I mean, a lot of my audience is conservative, and we're asking them to do something very unconservative. But you know, I think letting yourself consistently be touched and be violated, I don't think that's very conservative. I think it's permissive.
Right.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
so basically we've got the neurotic is a person whose desire is borrowed by the big other, and his actions are blocked by this overactive conscience that he has, and he prefers like a soft change rather than a structurally different change. Now, um what does that person do when, for example, the touching becomes unbearable? Because you know sometimes people, like I said earlier, they book a flight, but they don't book that flight all the way, right?
I think off camera we talked about a vacation, and so they go on a long vacation, and I think some people went during the pandemic. They went on a 1 year, 2 year vacation, right? And now they're back. A lot of those people returned, right? So tell me about this long vacation that they went.
Yeah, so this is the thing about expatting, right? That's a big issue that there is, because again, we're not attacking people for moving, right? But what we're saying is that there is a pattern in the people that do move that we keep recognizing that is very aligned with the neurotic structure, right? And so, the people that say that they want to leave, they talk about, well, I want a different life. I want to go to this exploration thing, this crazy adventure that I fantasize about, right? Um, and there are people who do the research, who like go on Instagram posts, right? Some of them even hire people to help them uh, move, right? But it never goes all the way. And instead, what happens is they're just they come here, and instead of building structures that help them stay, it's like you said, they're in this internal vacation where it's exactly like here, right? In the beach, sipping on margaritas instead of, for example, figuring out how to get residency.
They're kind of renting the life that they want, but I want people to buy that life. I want it to be a permanent change. Their life should be that vacation. It shouldn't be something that, okay, they tried it.
So you don't have anything against people enjoying their life on the beach, with their families or even by themselves. That's not your point. Your point is that instead of temporarily having that, let's have that forever.
What is the obsessional neurotics relationship with enjoyment?
Right. Let's talk about that actually, right? Because the neurotic wants to enjoy himself, and at the same time, he feels conflicted about it, right? There's an immense amount of guilt that the neurotic feels for enjoying himself. And because of the guilt, he starts resenting that, when we talked about the other, right? He starts resenting the other because he feels like it's the other that's giving him this guilt. And instead of like fully enjoying himself, um, he can't. He feels guilty. He resents the other, and then that leaks onto other people enjoying themselves. And then he gets the substitute enjoyment that's not a real enjoyment from policing other people.
So the neurotic is afraid of enjoying too much because they feel that in this overwhelming joy, they would lose themselves and they would lose their identity.
Right.
But I guess I would say that if you enjoy yourself a lot, if you push yourself hard in the negative or in the positive sense, you're going to calm down eventually. Your body will regulate and you'll gain your identity back. There's
Right. And even, let's say, for example, even if you don't move correctly, if you don't move fast, or don't do these concrete steps, right? You're still going to lose your identity either way, just because of these massive economic changes that happen that you have no control over. So if you're going to lose your subjectivity regardless, you might as well lose your subjectivity in a way where it's not in FEMA camps, but here on the beach.
The ongoing structure. So Freud discusses the neurotic as an anal retentive drive. They're kind of holding it back and they kind of want to let it out slowly under their own conditions, right? But you have to understand that there's what you're comfortable with and there is what you're going to benefit from. And one, there's that. And then two, this video is really neurotic bait where they're going to see us enjoying ourselves or project that we're enjoying ourselves so much. And like you said off camera, they have a compulsion. When they see someone enjoying themselves too much, they're going to flip out. They're going to push through. And I'm sure everyone here has seen comment sections.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, we even when we posted our bikini ad, you had a lot of people attacking you for having a model with that bikini on, saying that it's not morally right and all that stuff.
They're afraid of enjoying as a man a bikini, or that actually that my model might be enjoying the bikini a lot. So
it could be that they feel that immense guilt when they do enjoy themselves, or when they do enjoy that bikini, right? They're like, oh, I really like this model with the bikini. She looks so hot, but it feels wrong to enjoy that. It feels wrong to actually uh, be having those emotions. And so instead of acknowledging that they have that problem, that they feel guilty about enjoyment and trying to get to the root cause of it, they just project that onto you, saying that you're this immoral person because you're enjoying yourself too much.
a lot of their morality, if you were really to push them about the bikini, first of all, the model wears bikinis. She likes it. Pictures of the model in the bikini helps the model get more modeling gigs, helps her make more money. I think that's really, really important. And then one, it's good for her. I think it's really good. It's good for us in terms of publicity. And if I have to use a model to convince a whole bunch of married men to lower their taxes so they could spend more money on their family, in my opinion, I'm moral, right? I'm an ends justify the means kind of guy. And if I got you with the model and now you have a good house, I know you can get a house here on the beach for $250,000, $500,000. That's not happening in California, right? So if I did that with a Latin American model and a British bikini, then I think that's good, right? but they're really fixated on, well, what if someone has too much fun? What if someone has like a sexual enjoyment?
Right. And then they're projecting these internal regulation systems that they have themselves onto you. And then they try to force you as well. But the real reason is actually it's the jealousy that you enjoy yourself without feeling guilty, while they enjoy themselves, but they have to feel guilty about it.
I, I One of the big dangers of really the West is when you push out and you start making a large amount of money, or you make a big difference, a big economic shift, whether it be a promotion or you just have something that's a little bit nice, everyone's going to jump in and try and stop you because they're afraid that you're going to enjoy themselves so much in a way threatening them. And when you leave to another country, there's a lot less people blocking you.
But there's still people blocking you.
There are still people. There's just
So-
less of them.
There's just less of them. And they show up in different forms, I'm assuming.
So I guess the other thing is, there's this kind of regulation, right? People are afraid of a surplus overwhelming a flow, right? And they're pumping the brakes. But I guess I want to ask my audience, if you're constantly pumping the brakes, how are you going to get to your destination? How are you going to get to your ideal life if every time you feel that rush of more, you step on the brakes?
Right. Right. So what kind of solution would you offer to people who are being blocked by others?
One is, you need to shut up. You need to be quiet. You need to move in silence, because the more you tell people, the more opportunity they have to figure out where you are and how to jump in front of you. And I know that's a very negative, kind of pessimistic thing to say, but people are herd animals, and if they see one cow leave the enclosure, they're gonna close the enclosure. So you gotta understand that you enjoying yourself threatens other people's identity, and so you need to be quiet about it. You need to, if you enjoy something, if you have a big plan, I think you need to move in silence, and you're gonna find a lot of that advice in the entrepreneurial space, actually.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one. Number two, I think if you think about a professional athlete, if you think about a businessman, a CEO, an entrepreneur, if you think about anyone who's successful, they're successful because they've outworked and they've outspent the competition. I know about this in bodybuilding. If you think about Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, they really, really outspent everyone else in the space. So ask yourself, how am I going to outspend the people in my space if every time I have a big surplus, I feel guilty? How is that going to happen?
Right. And how is that going to happen? That as soon as people find out that you have a big surplus, they'll try and take it away from you as well.
I think the big surplus that people will take away with you as soon as you have it is taxes. You're going to get yourself into the new tax bracket, and I really recommend very careful financial planning, and we help our clients achieve this kind of financial planning. So if you're an entrepreneur and you do hit that surplus, you are, on one hand, tax compliant, but two, don't start paying higher and higher taxes, like a lot of our European friends are right now.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, the current tax rate in Germany, and many people don't know this, is they increased it from 48 to 51%.
I'd like to say, like, declaring yourself to be a Latin American nationality, maybe that's a bit ridiculous. Maybe that's a bit much. And I hear that. But I think what's more ridiculous is paying higher and higher taxes. You're giving away more and more of your money, right?
Right.
And how do you justify to your family giving away their money that you earned as a provider?
Well, there's no real justification for that. People will always just tell them as an excuse that it's the right thing to do or that there's nothing they can do about it, right?
Is it right for your family to have less money so that governments can engage in very expensive wars?
Well,
It's
not just wars, but other things too, as we recently found out.
we've been finding out a lot of things, right? And your governments don't care about you. And I think you should care about your family. I think you should care about yourself more than a national myth that historically has been used against you over and over again to extract more and more resources.
How many psyops do you need to see before you start changing your life? It's the real question you should be asking yourself.
I think a lot of people have fell for it again awards. Um, I have a couple. Everyone has a couple fell for it again awards, but you don't need to look. You got your fell for it again award, you know, but you don't need more. Okay, so the next time everyone's collecting fell for it again awards, just be on this beach with us instead. I would say.
Yeah, so I think we're reaching the last minutes of this
Okay.
podcast, so we should wrap it up.
What are the practical takeaways that we can help people to get over their neuroses, their mental blockages, so they could really benefit from everything that they're earning and live in a place that respects them and affords them the highest possible life?
Well, for one, let me just be frank, right? Let me just be as direct as possible. On your own, you can never deal with your neurosis. It's not going to happen. You're going to always, because like we said earlier, it's a compulsion, right? It's a reflex. So you're always, it doesn't matter how much like self-reflection you have, because self-reflection is a myth, to be honest with you. You're always going to follow that neurotic structure. Like, I can tell myself, oh, I fell for it again. But it doesn't matter if I keep falling for it and I keep falling for it. So on your own, you're never going to get rid of that neurosis. You need to essentially hire someone to help you with that.
I think
And
that
the reason for that, why you need to hire someone, is because it's not so much that the other person earns money, but it's the pain of spending money that is just so in your face that you would want to work through, so you stop spending money.
I think, I worked as a trainer, and you have a person watching you, helping you push through your, let's say, your physical neurosis. There's tax planners that will say, look, like, I know you want to do this, blah, blah, blah. I know this might make sense, but this is actually what's good for you. And so sometimes it helps for an external person to come in and tell you what to do, so that instead of you self-checking, you self-blocking, you just follow best practices and hit your objective. I
Right.
think that's
It's like going to the gym, right? Your personal trainer is gonna pick the best workouts for you. He's gonna pick the best nutrition plan for you, so your body optimizes, uh, right, to build up your body, right? And I think the same goes for neurosis. Like, if you, I mean, yes, you could train by yourself at the gym, but it's not going to be as optimized as if you have somebody working you through. And with neurosis, it's a bit more complicated because it's very abstract. Most people don't know what their neurosis is until somebody tells them, right? And so that's why I believe that you won't be able to work through your neurosis on your own. It's not going to happen. You're always going to cut yourself out of finding the truth, or these root causes in your internal systems, right, in your psychology. And Freud actually talks about this. He calls it a drive to not know. And he says that it's actually so it's as passionate as the feeling of love.
So,
And
yeah,
the feeling of love, right? Which is to say that, you know, the same love that you feel for your mother, that same feeling, the same intensity,
that's
is
how much they
also
want to not
that,
know.
that you don't want to know what's wrong with you, right?
I guess with a trainer or with a tax consultant, he's not you, and in a way, his distance allows him to say, "Look, you're doing this wrong." When I train people, I wanted my clients to have the best transformations, and I push people to they're a bit uncomfortable, but I was thinking not so much about their short-term comfort, but more about their long-term results. And sometimes you need someone to kind of run behind you and push you into what's good for you. And I know that we come from an individualistic culture. We want to be very independent and stuff like that. But for big body transformation, there's always a coach. Top bodybuilders always have a coach. Top athletes have a coach. Tiger Woods had a coach. And you need a tax coach. You might need a lifestyle coach. When you're decorating your house, a lot of people want to fill it with kitsy objects, and the designer has to be like, look, like, put that in a drawer. Like, this is grandma's house.
Right, right. But here's the thing: like the neurotic will always tell himself that he can do it on his own, right? He feels this weird. His ego, for some reason, gets hurt when he has to ask for help. But what we're saying is, if all these athletes needed help to get to the point where they are, what makes you any different? I mean, these athletes, they're in the genetic pool, like they're the top
They're the
1%.
best.
They're the best. And so you, who is like average, why do you think that you do not need any help to not just build up your body, but also build up these psychological structures, right, to work through them? And that's the thing. Like as soon as we point that out to people, they kind of just freeze, and that freezing is them repressing in that moment. It's that drive to not know activating in that moment, and they'll make themselves not know again. But what we're saying is like, don't let that happen to you, because this is the reason why your life, pretty much wherever you are right now, sucks and could be way better if you just took that ego hit and decided, you know what, I do need help. I do need help to work through this.
I think, you're going to take an ego hit one way or another, right? If you lose, it's going to be a big ego hit, right? And if your personal trainer pushes you hard, or if your tax advisor or your residency advisor pushes you hard, it's going to be an ego hit, right? So all change is going to require an ego hit. So I would say, why don't you take an ego hit that's going to benefit you instead of the should have, would have, could have ego hit? It's I would say, think about your long-term future, because one way or another, you're gonna get hit in the ego.
Right, right, right. And that's the thing. That's the thing that people really don't want to acknowledge, right? You're gonna get hit anyway. You're gonna lose regardless. But if but you could at least win something back. You could win something back. Like you could move here, and then yeah, maybe you lost like your social circle that you had in the US or whatever country you're from, but at least you're financially more stable, right?
I would say the other thing is, you're never gonna be younger, and it's never gonna get easier. So the sooner you go, the easier it's gonna be.
Yeah. I mean, tell me about it, dude. As soon as I turned 25, I was like, man, I'm about to I have 5 years left to really figure out my life. Like at 30, I got at least do something. That reality just fucked me over. Like,
learning a new language isn't going to be easier. None of it's going to get easier. So I would say rip the Band-Aid off now, move quickly now. And these residency programs are only going to get harder. The requirements are only going to get harder. The financial barriers are only going to get bigger. So think about the past 10 years and how much harder things got, and however much harder they got in 10 years, they're going to get even harder faster. So I guess
it's like catching a train, right?
right.
You want to catch the train early. You don't want to be there like as the train leaves. So you can get the good seat in the train that's like by the window with the table, and you can like enjoy your meal as the train goes or read a book, right? But if you show up on time, you're gonna get the shitty spots, and if you show up late, then it's done. It's over.
All right. I think that's a great place to end our amazing podcast. Catch the train early, get the good seats, leave early. You want time to put your baggage there. You want to move quickly. And the faster you move, the easier it's going to be. And then you can live an amazing life with us. I'm Gillo. This is my co-host, Vito, signing off for the Pillars of Wisdom podcast. Tune in next time and live well and live long.
Christ.